Good morning, esteemed members of the panel and dear students. I am Shermay Alisea Percival. Together with me are my groupmates Adler Lance Espinosa, Dino Fredney Fabi, and Russell Vincent Javier. And we are going to present our thesis paper with the title The Philippine Steel Industry, an Evaluation of the Steel Production Chain. Our presentation is divided into four main parts. Firstly, we are going to present the rationale or the background of the study. Secondly, the conceptual framework of the steel production chain requirements of an integrated steel mill. Thirdly, the statement of the problem, wherein we discuss the gap that the study aims to address, which includes the general and specific objectives. Lastly, for the first part, the significance of the study, wherein we discuss the importance of the present study and its potential benefits to the target population. For the second part, we will be discussing a detailed methodology that consists of the data sources, research instruments, and finally, the key selection criteria. As for the third part, we will be presenting the results of the data collection. And lastly, the fourth part, we will be discussing the conclusion of the study. Moving forward, I'd like to focus on the discussion of our rationale. Let me begin by noting that the steel is deemed or considered as the backbone of modern industry for a reason that it serves as a necessary input to numerous industries. With this, I'd like to draw your attention to the Philippine iron and steel industry. It is believed to be an integral part of stimulating the nation's economic growth and sustainable development. It is seen that the country's apparent steel consumption has been increasing over the years. However, the country remains inadequate in domestic steel demand since an integrated steel mill is not present thereon the Build program. So this development plan of the Duterte administration intends to entice or attract foreign investors to further investments that will also facilitate the establishment of an integrated steel mill in the country and in return create employment opportunities, promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth. Best of all, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority, the Philippines is considered one of the world's richest in mineral resources. Iron ore, for instance, which is a raw material in steel production, is one of the major reserves of the country, amounting to 1.56 billion metric tons. On a different note, the establishment of an ISM in the country will require the employment of individuals with significant skills and diverse knowledge. Opportunely, the Philippines offers courses and training programs for the specialized sectors in the steel industry. Therefore, the availability of raw materials, rather, the presence of steel production processes, and labor skills can create a competitive advantage. For this reason, this paper primarily evaluates the steel production chain of the Philippine steel industry vis-a-vis the country's readiness to host an ISM. Now, let us proceed to the presentation and discussion of the conceptual framework.
To establish an ISM, we need to evaluate the requirements of the steel production chain, such as the availability of raw materials, the iron and steel making processes, the labor and skills needed in the operations and production of steel, and the enabling environment that will support to the establishment of an integrated mill. So, what is an ISM? Integrated steel mill is an energy and mineral-intensive industry that manufactures iron and steel using primary raw materials such as iron ore, limestone, and coal. In many mills, scrap steel is the secondary material to remake iron and steel. For the raw material requirements, the primary resources for steel production are coal, iron ore, and limestone. And the secondary material in many mills is scrap steel. Coal is the main source of carbon for energy and heating and is used to produce coke. Iron ore is the metallic mineral used for making steel, and limestone is the fluxing substance to make slag that removes impurities in the production. So for iron and steel making processes, it involves various production machinery that produces semi-finished and finished steel products. It consists of a sinter plant, coke oven, blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace, electric arc furnace, continuous casting machine, rolling mills, and steel finishing. The process starts with the raw materials being charged into the sintering plant, converting the raw materials into an agglomerated product for the blast furnace. The coal will be heated in the coke oven to produce coke, which will be used as a fuel in the blast furnace and serve as a reducing agent in smelting the iron ore. The oxygen must be extracted before it can be used and known as reducing. The process starts and is done in the blast furnace, where smelting machine injects hot air to produce hot metal and convert the material into liquid steel. The liquid steel is transported into the basic oxygen furnace. During the process, the oxygen is blown into the hot liquid metal to reduce the carbon content of the molten material. After the process, the liquid steel enters into the continuous casting process, where a water-cooled system extracts the heat of the material until the material solidifies for the required shape, making the semi-finished products. In the secondary steel production, scrap steel is melted in the electric arc furnace, in producing the liquid steel and subject to solidification in the casting process to make the semi-finished products. The solidified products will undergo rolling to decrease the thickness of the body and shape the material into the desired finished product. For labor and skills, the steel industry requires labor and skills in steel production to operate steelmaking machines and produce high-performance steel. Equipped professionals for the iron and steel industry must have effective skills and competencies, such as engineering, management, and vocational skills. For the enabling environment, investments, research, and development in the steel industry, such as acquiring integrated steelmaking machines and advancement in production technology, enable the industrial environment to establish an integrated mill, improving the overall steel industrial performance and production. And now, let's proceed to the statement of the problem.
For the statement of the problem, in light of the increasing demand of steel, the primary objective of the study is to evaluate the production chain in the Philippine steel industry. The study aims to analyze the available raw materials and also to identify if there is available training courses offered in the country so that we can tell if we're ready for an ISM or integrated steel mill in comparison to other major steel producing nations. We'd also like to identify if there are existing iron and steel making processes. We also require infrastructure, and in order to accomplish infrastructure growth, we must be still demand self sufficient. Due to the lack of an ISM, we have a low demand for steel. The present study also shows the volume of crude steel production, imports and exports, apparent steel use, which lays the foundation of the current competitive position of the Philippine steel industry, which in return allow the nation to create an edge over the competitors in the market. In the next slide, we will be talking about the significance of the study.
By achieving the objectives of the study, it mainly helps identify the viability of establishing an integrated steel mill in the Philippines, and through that, it also helps realize the vision of the Philippine Iron and Steel Institute that by 2030 the industry will be the major producer of safe and high-quality steel products for 70% of the domestic market, and manufacturing world-class products for the industry. And the study may also assist in the growth and the crafting of policies for the Philippine steel industry. Furthermore, the steel sector outputs are the necessary inputs for infrastructure construction. Thus, the discussion on this paper will help achieve the goals of the Duterte administration's Build 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 program, which aims to usher the Philippines' golden age of infrastructure. So, for the next section of the presentation, we will discuss the research methodology.
Now, let us take a look at the research methodology. The study adopts a qualitative case study approach. Now, I would like to briefly mention the study's data sources. Firstly, the key informant interview and focus group discussion. The data collected were transformed by acquiring an intelligent transcription, and which was then subjected to an analysis to elaborate, organize, and interpret the results based on the well defined research objectives. Secondly, the current steel production processes in the Philippines, compared to that of major steel producing nations, were acquired from an internet based data collection. Thirdly, in identifying the available raw materials and courses or training needed for steel production in the Philippines, the researchers collected data through KII, FGD, Mines and Geosciences Bureau, and Department of Energy. Lastly, the data for the current position of the Philippine steel industry in terms of the volume of crude steel production, imports, exports, and apparent steel use was collected from the World Steel Association Steel Statistical Yearbook years 2010 to 2019. Next, these are the research instruments utilized in the study. The study utilizes a set of questions that served as a primary data collection tool for the key informant interviews and focus group discussions. Lastly, we have the video conferencing software, which was the medium for synchronous communication, and it was also utilized to obtain data from the online interview. Moving on, the table you're seeing in the screen is a key selection criteria for the key informants and focus group discussion participants, in which there are five categories, namely experts who work and have worked specifically in a steel company located in Region 10. Additionally, participants of the focus group discussions are stakeholders from the following sectors: skills development agencies, civil society, community leaders, and former National Steel Corporation employees. Finally, let us move on to the results of the study. The table shown in the screen presents the raw material requirements, such as iron ore, coal, and limestone that are available in the Philippines. Firstly, iron ore deposits are sourced from Zamboanga Sibugay, Bicol Peninsula, and Rizal. Magnetite sand, in particular, is abundant in northern Cagayan province and eastern Leyte. There are low-grade magnetite sands located in large lagoon reserves in Cagayan Valley and along the shores of Leyte. Apart from magnetite sand, hematite is found in Darap, Camarines Norte. However, the iron ore available in the Philippines is either low grade, which is not necessarily suitable for iron making, or insufficient in supply. There are actually global producers of high grade iron ores, such as hematite. These producers are Australia, Brazil, Canada, India, Russia, South Africa, and the United States. Another primary raw material for steel making, which is also a necessary input in the blast furnace, is the metallurgical coal or coking coal. The Philippines, however, only has thermal coal that can be extracted from Malangas, Zamboanga. Thermal coal is utilized for heating, but not as a fluxing agent in iron making. Therefore, the country does not have the required input for the coke oven. There are global coal producers for energy and steel production. And to name a few, we have Australia, Germany, Poland, Russia, the United States, and South Africa. Lastly, limestone, which is another primary raw material, is actually available and has an adequate supply in the areas of eastern Visayas and northern Mindanao. There are two types of limestone available here in the Philippines. You have the low grade limestone, which is 86% calcium carbonate, commonly used for cement, and on the other hand, high grade limestone, which is 98% calcium carbonate and what is frequently used for steel making. So, lime is used as a flux in the majority of steel manufacturing processes. So, the limestones from the Philippines, particularly in Bohol, are often exported to other ASEAN countries and other regions around the world. Next, we have the steel production processes of top steel producing countries and the Philippines.
Top steel producing countries ranked by the World Steel Association in steel manufacturing, such as Germany, China, South Korea, and Japan, have integrated mill from centering, coke oven, blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace, electric arc furnace, continuous casting machine, rolling, and steel finishing. On the other hand, the Philippine steel industry consists of only a centering plant, electric arc furnace, continuous casting, rolling, and steel finishing. However, certain developments are initiated by one of the Philippine steel manufacturers, namely Steel Asia, investing 100 billion pesos for the next 5 years in developing their steelmaking range, with a plan to establish an integrated steel plant to produce sufficient products for the demand of the country. Even though the Philippines doesn't yet have an integrated steel mill, there are steel products produced locally, such as angle bars, beams, and other medium steels in Batangas, while Bulacan and Cebu produce reinforcing bars and wire rods. Steel Asia, Pag-asa Steelworks Incorporated, Capitol Steel Corporation, and Cathay Pacific Steel Corporation are long steel producers, while Puyat Steel Corporation, Sonic Steel Industries Incorporated, and Phil Steel Group produce flat products. Long products are finished steel made from billets or blooms, while flat products are finished steels made from slabs. And now, let's proceed to the labor and skills.
Labor and skills. Steel Asia Manufacturing Corporation and Germany's Badisch Stahl Engineering have collaborated to create a world-class training facility in southern Luzon. Steel Asia and BSE have committed to ensuring that the training facility will develop future steel industry workers. The steel industry requires labor and skills in steel production to operate steelmaking machines and produce high-performance steel. At present, Philippine universities and certain technical institutions provide courses and training to produce industrial workers and skills needed in the steel industry, particularly in manufacturing, quality assurance, management, processing, and machine operations. In the next slide, we'll be talking about the climate trend of the consumption in the Philippines.
To further understand, we will explain to you the current climate trend of the consumption of steel in the Philippines for the last 10 years. The crude steel production, apparent steel use, and imports and exports of semi-finished and finished steel products will also serve as the industry performance indicators. So in this graph, our apparent steel use, or the amount of steel that the country consumes, shows an upward trend throughout the years, and it peaked in 2018 at 10,726 metric tons. And to compare it in our crude steel production, for example, in 2018, it only produced at an amount of 1,475 metric tons of steel. This explains that we cannot supply the domestic demand of the country, and that is why it imports a large amount of steel in 2018, 9,104 metric tons of steel products was imported, which is unsustainable for the country's economic growth. Furthermore, the industry exports insubstantial amounts to counteract the imports of steel in the country. Like in 2018, only 33 metric tons was exported. Now let us proceed to the conclusion of our study.
By way of summary, the Philippines has gradually developed its manufacturing capability, yet still is unable to supply the domestic steel demand since an ISM is not present. The present study reveals that the Philippines has the available raw materials for an integrated steel mill: iron ore, limestone, and coal. As mentioned earlier, limestone deposits present in the country are utilized for cement manufacturing and industrial use. However, most iron ore available in the country is not suitable for steel production, and only a few are considered high grade, while the available coal is not for steel making. Subsequently, various educational and technical vocational institutions in the country offer the courses and training programs necessary in the operations and management of an integrated steel mill. Apart from the available raw materials and training courses required for steelmaking, the country has steel production processes including sintering, electric arc furnace, continuous casting, and rolling and finishing operations. In essence, the availability of the raw materials, in demand skills, and production processes in the country, alongside the continuous improvement of the country's investment climate, research and development, facilitates the realization of the nation's vision of establishing an ISM in the Philippines. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. We would like to thank you all for your time and attention this morning.